Hello and welcome to Dialogue. I'm Yang Rui. Thousands of Turks massed on Sunday for a cross-party rally to condemn the coup attempt made a few days earlier against the president Recep Tayyip Erdogan amid a purge of suspected state enemies. Istanbul's Taksim Square was transformed into a sea of national flags as Erdogan's ruling Islamic conservatives and the opposition secular camps briefly set aside their differences in a show of national unity. The official number of those in custody since the July 15th putsch has surged above 13,000 soldiers, police, justice officials and civilians in a wave of arrests that has alarmed NATO allies and European leaders. And in stark contrast to the broadly celebratory mood in Istanbul, human rights group Amnesty International claims it has credible evidence of the beating and torture of post-coup detainees. So how do Turks themselves feel about yet another coup attempt in their country? And how does the rest of the world regard the current situation, in particular the US, Europe and Russia, all of whom have different but strong reasons to be interested in Turkey? With me here in the studio, I'm happy to be joined by Rick Dunham, a visiting scholar at Tsinghua University, and He Wenping, research fellow at the Institute of West Asian and African Studies in CAS. And speaking to us from Turkey is CCTV correspondent Natalie Carney. But first, let's take a look at this.
On July 15th, all eyes in Turkey were turned to the Bosphorus Bridge in Istanbul that connects Asia and Europe. On it was military tanks. This was the first signal of the coup attempt in Turkey. Next came the news of jets flying over the capital, Ankara. Parts of the military were making a move to overtake the government. The Turkish president, who was on vacation, had quickly gotten on a plane and had to make a decision. Travel to the heart of the government, Ankara, or to the heart of the nation, Istanbul. He decided to go to Istanbul, where he was once mayor during the early stages of his political career. But the choice was also related to security.
The commander of the 1st Land Forces advised the president to head to Istanbul instead of Ankara, stating that Ankara was not safe. That decision carried great importance, so they used diversion tactics for safety precautions.
That decision may have been a turning point in the coup. The president also made another vital move. He called on the people to take the streets, to block the military. And so they did. When he landed in Istanbul, thousands of ruling Justice and Development Party supporters were at his command, literally ready to die for their cause. They would not allow a military coup to happen. Had he landed in Ankara instead, the outcome could have been different. Not only was the atmosphere different in Ankara, but the attacks more intense. Government and police offices were targeted by coup plotters. This police headquarters in Ankara was one of the most critical locations that was attacked during the coup attempt. It was one of the places that was attacked first. It was hit by soldiers, tanks, helicopters and jets. The destruction was devastating. Over 200 people were killed on the evening of the coup attempt. The government emphasized it will not be forgotten.
We will preserve the section of the parliament that was bombed as a democracy museum.
Since that evening, the government has declared a 3-month state of emergency across the country and carried out an intense crackdown on coup plotters, who they believe are supporters of Fethullah Gulen, a Muslim cleric believed to be the mastermind of the attempted coup. But the people of Turkey remain defiant and insist they will continue their daily lives despite the tangible tension in the country.
Let me first talk to our CCTV correspondent in Ankara for the latest. Hello, Natalie. What can you tell us about the latest development in either Istanbul or Ankara, capital city of Turkey?
Well, things have calmed down quite substantially since the coup attempt just over a week and a half ago now. Although emotions are still very, very raw in the streets, and what we are still seeing is that nationalistic pride that we saw the night of the 15th, when we saw not only AKP supporters, but Turks of all political affiliations out onto the streets, walking up against tanks in front of guns to protect their country, to protect democracy here in Turkey. And I think that's something that we should very much emphasize, is that all this support that we may be seeing right now from the Turkish population in regards to the coup, in regards to what may appear the AKP or the state of emergency, is in support of democracy. Well, there is many in society that are still against the AKP and against measures that Erdogan wants to implement in the country. Their nationalistic pride is definitely trumping everything at the moment, and people are very proud to be Turkish at the moment, despite who's running the country, and want to see democracy maintained in the country. And so that's why we're seeing a lot of support for any of the moves the AKP is making at the moment, despite many people not necessarily supporting the AKP at usual times.
Despite the sweeping jubilation that gripped the whole country at this moment in the name of protecting democracy, as the arrest waves continue in this country, it seems the first response is different, if not entirely different, from the second response to what happened in Turkey in terms of whether this is a democracy. Rick, what's your take?
My view is that democracy in Turkey is fragile. And as Natalie was saying, there was very strong support from across the political spectrum for civilians ruling as opposed to a military coup. But Erdogan has a very fragile majority, and the question is, will he subvert democracy in Turkey so that his rule is not fragile anymore? And that's the concern of much of Europe. That's what causes a lot of the international complications right now.
What's the chance for President Erdogan to call for a snap election so that his party will become a majority in the parliament, so that his power base will be firmly consolidated? Wenping.
Well, I think this democracy in Turkey is not only fragile, even in danger. So I think now Erdogan himself, he used this democracy, this way to call the people on the street and to defeat this coup. Yeah, that's very good. But aftermath, after this failed coup, and the way he has done, that is the purge, and also the number, increasing number of those people has been detained and also arrested, or even you should be out of your job, like those professors and even the news agency. So all of that, I don't see this has consolidated this basis for further democracy. Actually, through those way he has been doing, even before, I was in Istanbul later last month to join like the UN humanitarian summit there. I have seen by myself those new number, those mosques all the way on the street, and also the people, even women on the street, also have been covered. Now the number has been getting more and more. I have been there for 3 times. So every time I see more those religious color. So people even talked with me. They also concerned about the future of the country. So, and we also seeing Erdogan now has switched the country from prime military responsible those political system, now moving to the presidential system. So he wants to grasp more power in his own hand. So those kind of trend, more religions and more power in just in one person, one man's hand. I don't see this is fully with this democracy. This the way he used to defeat those coup. And also, I think people on the ground, on the street to support, to defeat the coup, doesn't mean they're all with this party, the Justice and the Development Party. Doesn't mean they all surrounded President Erdogan. I think all the ruling party and the people in the power have to realize this reality. People on the street, and then they also, like opposition party and the ruling party, they even not long ago, yeah, in the Sunday, they joined together in the square to trying to call for unity. to unity, but they are not calling for support the government, calling for support the president. They're just calling for unity. They don't want to see the country be divided further. They see the danger if maybe there will be another coup, another possible planned coup. Even this danger has been mentioned by the high-level officials themselves. They are aware of another coup.
Natalie, currently Turkey faces many issues, and one of the most important issues is, of course, how we look at democracy. And these two guest speakers in our studio here, Beijing, say they don't trust the democracy, quote-unquote, that is taking root, if any, in Turkey. What's your view about the differences between a call for national unity or support of this president who is increasingly known for being a strong man, and the very idea of having a strong man in a country that applies for membership of the EU may call into question the legitimacy of this government? What do you think?
Yes, democracy here, I would have to say, is somewhat fragile, but it's a very multifaceted society here in Turkey. The AKP, of course, have their staunch supporters, which, according to last elections, amounted just to over 52% of the population of those who voted. And those are, of course, the very pious people who still live traditional pious lives in Turkey. That's a large portion of the population we cannot forget or cannot neglect. Just because we see Taksim Square and sort of all the modern beauties of Istanbul, so to speak, on commercials, or that's where we visit as tourists, the large majority of Turkish society are very Muslim. They live very traditional and conservative lives, and their vote counts, and they have been voting for a more conservative AKP party. As well, the AKP also has a lot of success economically here in Turkey. They've been able to turn the economy around while it's suffering at the moment due to the ongoing problems, not just within Turkey, but within the neighborhood. Turkey's economy over, say, the last 10 years, 13 years since the AKP came to power, really has flourished and turned things around for a lot of people in society here. And as well, too, we have to remember that there really isn't that strong of an opposition who could, at least this is the argument of many, who could take this country forward, who has the ability, who has the experience that the AKP has to run a country in such a volatile neighborhood. The opposition parties just aren't capable of doing that. At least that's one of the arguments here. So again, many people will turn towards the AKP despite not being that supportive of the way that they do things, but because there really is no alternative at the moment. I was just speaking to a group of CHP, the main opposition parties here.
Here is a question
this morning, and they say, you know what, it's better the devil we know.
Natalie, here is a question as to whether a political pendulum is swinging between a secular authoritarianism and Islamic authoritarianism. This is fundamentally a question that we have to address. Natalie?
Well, obviously, I think time will tell on that one. There are some clear moves that the government are making to go down that path. But again, this agenda is not hidden. And people are still supporting the AKP, are still supporting Erdogan. They still represent, you know, a small majority of the population. So it's yet to be seen how far the government will take this. And as far as the authoritarian tone the government is saying, the government argues that because the parliament is so divided, no measures are getting pushed through, nothing is happening, there is no developments within parliament. So they argue that they need this one, you know, they need this authoritarianism to push bills, to push motions through parliament so that we can start moving forward. At least that's the argument of the government on that. But again, we have to wait and see how far the government will actually take this.
Thank you very much. You are watching Dialogue with Rick Dunham, He Wenping, and Natalie Carney. We're discussing the political fallout of a failed coup that currently may have united this country. But there's one important political figure who is allegedly still in exile in the United States, and the Turkish government calls for him to be brought to justice. Of course, with the help of the US government. That's, of course, a defining moment about the relationship between Washington and Ankara. We'll be back for more of such interesting issues. Stay with us, please. Welcome back. At the center of the controversy is someone called Fethullah Gulen. who now lives in exile in Pennsylvania and promotes a philosophy that blends a mystical form of Islam with the staunch advocacy of democracy, education, science, and interfaith dialogue between different political groups in Turkey. Is he a spiritual leader of the serious opposition party, if any, in Turkey? Why do you think President Erdogan seems not to be able to forgive him for the alleged involvement in the coup?
Well, what's happened here is you had a falling out between two former allies, and you have one who has taken refuge in the United States and does not want to go back to Turkey. This is a very difficult diplomatic situation for the United States because Turkey is an ally. There's a big military base in Turkey with nuclear weapons, but the United States doesn't want to send someone back unless they are confident that he was actually involved in the coup. I mean, there is doubt because the government has not publicly released any evidence of his involvement. Erdogan has just declared it is true. They have turned over classified information to the U.S. government. Thus far, the U.S. government has not taken action. I would have to think that if there is overwhelming evidence, that the United States government would be in a very difficult position not to turn him back. But if there is not overwhelming evidence, then we're going to be in a situation where U.S.-Turkish relations could really be tense over the next few months.
Wenping, how difficult is this decision for President Obama to repatriate, quote-unquote, Mr. Gulen from the United States, since this guy did a lot to help President Obama to rebuild the relationship between Muslims and the United States following 9/11 terrorist attacks? Because one of the most important issues or tasks that President Obama had done in the wake of 9/11 after he took office, of course, was to reconstruct the relationship with the Arab world, with Islamic states. This guy, Gulen, did a lot to help him. Now, at this defining moment concerning the relationship between Washington and Ankara, what would happen? I mean,
yeah, that's the biggest headache now for President Obama. I think the headache is not only relates with the fate of an individual person, that person called Gulen, now living in the Pennsylvania, but I think the headache is because it relates with the role of the United States itself. Now the United States has been accused by the Turkey government, saying that's the country behind the coup, not only to that person, that the cleric called Gulen, this old guy already. So they are saying the United States is behind that because this guy is living in the U.S. and all those networks he has been running now is also from the U.S. So if he has done something really relates with that coup, and then there is a responsibility also of the United States because you couldn't know nothing about his activity. You have such a strong CIA, you know everything going on in this territory of the United States, so how could you don't know? So they are afraid of this. So if this accusation goes from an individual person now moves to the United States, the government, so how could you, Obama, handle the relation with Turkey?
Right, Natalie, here is the issue of human rights. Amnesty International accused President Erdogan and his regime of seriously violating human rights because of the massive arrests and even closure of schools and universities. Thousands of teachers and professors have lost their jobs. Now, the European Union has certainly alarmed and brought to the edge of its seat at this moment. What could happen? And second issue is it true that most of the European leaders currently keep silent about the coup, particularly the crackdown, simply because of the refugee issue? Brussels certainly expects Ankara to do a lot more to help ease the tensions that may have been caused by the asylum-seeking crisis in continental Europe. What do you think?
That's a big question. As far as the allegations of human rights abuses here in Turkey, the only one that has come out so far, from what I understand, is from Amnesty International, and that has not necessarily been proven. However, there needs to be a lot of understanding, of course, according to a lot of analysts I've spoken to, about the depth of threat that this Gulen movement poses, not just to the AKP, but again to Turkish democracy. And this is something that many people don't believe that the European Union understands. They don't understand this kind of a threat because they've never had to live that kind of a threat before. They don't live in the neighborhood that Turkey is in. So a lot of analysts are, questioning why the European Union is stepping so much into the territory of Turkey and telling Turkey how to run things when they have no experience of what it's like to do business here, quote unquote. So as well too, the incidents that happened on July the 15th, this attempted coup, according to the government, amounts now to terrorism. So and the government is going so far as to call the Gulenist movement a terrorist organization due to the fact that those that were involved in it were killing people on the streets. Over 250 people lost their lives that night. So there's sort of a change in tone towards the Gulenist movement, who again the government believes was behind the coup. This hasn't been absolutely proven yet. So the government is taking much more, substantiated steps towards cracking down on this Gulenist movement. And again, they've been dealing with this Gulenist movement for many, many years now. The Gulenists have been able to infiltrate some of the highest positions in the army, in the education system, even in the judiciary. So the government says that they have to cast this wide net to try to get everybody that they can that's associated to this terrorist organization. And again, Gulenists don't carry around cards saying, yes, I'm a member of the Gulenist network. So it's very difficult for the government to really decipher who is who in this game. So that's their justification as to why they've cast such a wide net. But they have also stated that they do promise and vehemently support that there will be no human rights infringements on this, and that those detained will be detained for only 30 days. I say only 30 days without charge, and that they will be processed as quickly as possible so that those that are proven innocent will be cleared and will be able to get back to life as normal. And again, from what I'm hearing on the streets and the Turkish population I'm speaking to, a lot of people really do support these measures because they are very sick of terrorism in general, of things that threaten the stability here in Turkey. They just want to live normal lives. So be it the threat from ISIL, be it the threat from neighboring countries, from internal threats, the PKK, this Gulenist movement, the people on the streets, be them AKP, CHP, MHP supporters, they just want to return to normal, stable lives. So at the moment, they're very much in support of any measures that the government deems necessary to crack down on these threats.
Thank you very much, Natalie, for being with us and the insightful comments about the latest development there. Thank you. Welcome back. Now, observers have been holding their breath about the roller coaster relationship between Moscow and Ankara. Very quickly, relationship was improved between these two capital cities, the two governments. Now, what could be the worst case scenario, Rick and Wenping, should President Obama refuse to extradite Mr. Gulen, the imam, so to speak, allegedly behind the curtain of the failed coup? What would be the worst case scenario? Well, do you think Turkey will embrace Russia, will give Russia a bear hug if it was to be rejected?
Well, the risk to the United States is that Turkey pivots to Russia, meaning that they look for a fellow strong man with similar interests. There's one big problem, though. Russia is protecting the Syrian government. Turkey is trying to overthrow the Syrian government. The only way the two of them could get together over the long term is to figure out a way to get rid of Assad in Syria and install someone who's acceptable both to Erdogan and Putin. If that happens, I could see a pivot away, but that's very complex.
Yeah, I agree with my colleague's comments, because the Syria issue now is the biggest hurdle between the Turkey and the Russia moving closer. But temporarily speaking, I think this is not, I will not use the pivot to Russia, maybe just moving to Russia is not pivot, it's just want to give a embrace, a warm up the relation, that's it. Because now at the moment, this is a mutual need between Russia and Ankara, because they have been isolated from the Western country. Russia is in isolation, now diplomatic is very lonely. It's very so, but Turkey similar. Now EU now give a big push to him, saying now you haven't been doing very good about this purge. It's not following abide by the law and also the regulation. And the US now has been blamed about this coup, behind the coup. So those relations, even US now threatening Ankara, saying you will no longer be the member of the NATO. And the EU also threatening, give a warning to the Ankara, saying if you continue doing this purge, and then even if you want to resume the death penalty, you will no longer qualified to have a talk with the EU about this entering of the EU, being a member of the EU. So Lady Angela Merkel has made that very clear. So all of those relations now seems very coming down, no longer warm up. So there's no other way to get through. So that's why the Angela make a very, sounds very interesting, saying they blame those pilot, saying they have shoot down the Russian, those plane, Russian the jet. It's not the order coming from the high-level officers. You see, the pilot has done that thing. And then they will, that's a scapegoat, whatever, and then they will remove one of the barrier, saying to warm up the relation with Russia. But I see this is a temporary warm-up, not long-term strategic, those shift.
Because a question for both of you, before we wrap up this very interesting discussion about the coup in Ankara. Will China take advantage of this current dilemma in Turkey? Because we were talking about whether President Erdogan will give a bear hug to President Vladimir Putin. But what about the other likelihood? It will apply for membership of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which has recruited India and Pakistan in this latest round of enlargement.
It would make a huge amount of sense. I mean, it's a Western anchor for the Shanghai coalition, and if Erdogan is interested, if Turkey's interested, that does make a lot of sense. The one thing China wants to do is avoid getting sucked into the military issue in the Middle East, Syria and Iraq, and the civil wars that are going on there. But if it comes to Shanghai, if it comes to an agreement that would that would form a pact from Turkey in the west to China in the east, that makes sense.
The upcoming G20 summit will take place in Hangzhou in September. Do you think there's a chance for President Xi Jinping to meet with his Turkish counterpart on the sidelines of the summit so that they will address issues of a common concern?
I think it's quite likely. Obviously, this new looking east policy has been taken place by Erdogan government. Of course, will do good to Russia, and of course will do good to China, because we share the border with Turkey. We have a common concern about those extremists and also terrorists. They are also doing those evil things in China, and they even war like Thailand and go war the Turkey, go to the Syria and the Iraqi. So with that, definitely we need this cooperation, sharing intelligence information with Ankara government. That's for sure. So we would like, I think, to strengthen our cooperation, particularly those anti-terror, those cooperation with Turkey, and also in that framework like Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which is good.
You guys have fallen short of mentioning the East Turkestan Islamic movement. Some of the members seek shelter in Turkey, and that has seriously alarmed the Chinese authorities. There's a lot of uncertainty, of course, concerning the political future of President Erdogan and the stability of that country that connects Asia and Europe with the Bosporus Strait. Until next time, I'll see you. Goodbye.